Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Express webinar series, Achieving Organizational Agility with Scrum at Scale. This is a bi-weekly series of short webinars. They're 30 minutes or less, so perfect for a lunch break. And they feature Scrum at Scale experts who will be sharing insights on how to apply the Scrum at Scale framework to really attain organizational agility. So each webinar in this series will be focused on a different, unique topic of interest regarding Scrum at Scale. And today's topic is actually Scrum at Scale implementations. So how does this actually look in action? My name is Jessica Larson. I'm the director of the Scrum at Scale trainer program, and I will be hosting today's webinar, moderating questions as we go. And as a registrant of this webinar series, we will be keeping you up to date on future events and topics, but you can also find a list of the upcoming events on our website at any time. At scrumatscale.com/events. Now, as you may be aware, the Scrum at Scale framework is really the natural extension of the core Scrum framework. It was created by the co-creator of Scrum, Dr. Jeff Sutherland, and it's been used to successfully transform the way work is done across many industries and domains. If you're interested in learning more about where it's being used and how it's being used today, please feel free to check out our growing library of case studies that's available on our website at scrumatscale.com. Some of our trainers are also offering free virtual coaching, I should say. So if you're interested in participating in those sessions, check them out on our website under resources and free virtual coaching sessions. Now, before I introduce today's speaker, I would like to briefly cover a few housekeeping items. So first, to provide you with the best listening experience, all audio lines except the host and presenter will be muted during the webinar. But if you have questions, please at any time feel free to ask them through the Q&A panel on your console, and we will be answering those as best we can as they come through and at the end of today's presentation. The chat feature will also be available, so if you'd like to share comments with the other webinar participants, feel free to use the chat feature. And finally, this webinar is being recorded. It will be available to play on demand from both the Scrum at Scale website as well as our YouTube channel. And we will send everyone on the line a link to access that recording and the presentation slides by this time tomorrow. I also want to mention that these webinars are eligible for SEU credit. That's Scrum Education Unit credits from the Scrum Alliance. You will need to view 2 webinars for each credit. Now, without further ado, I am very excited to introduce today's speaker, Simon Roberts. So Simon is a lean and agile enterprise coach. He's a certified Scrum trainer and certified Scrum at Scale trainer. He teaches in both English and in German, and works primarily in Germany and Scotland, as well as other parts of Europe and the UK. He has over 35 years of experience working in project management and product development, and has been focused primarily on helping organizations to become more agile for the last 20 years. He is an incredible educator. He's contributed a great deal to the Scrum at Scale training material, and is frankly one of the best training from the back of the room instructors that I've had the privilege to see in action. Nowadays, he specializes in enterprise transformation, and so today he's going to be talking to us about different implementations of Scrum at Scale that he has led in organizations of various sizes across Germany. So I would like to give you a warm welcome, Simon. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today.
So thanks, Jessica. Thanks for that great introduction, and thank you for allowing me to join you all today. I'm coming to you from the sunny, for a change, and beautiful west coast of Scotland. And a little bit about me. As Jessica said, my name is Simon Roberts. My company is Scrum Center. My earliest experiences with what became Agile were in the late 1990s with extreme programming. Since about 2001, I've been helping organizations to adopt Scrum. My company is called Scrum Center, and it's based in Scotland, UK, but as Jessica said, I work throughout Europe. And myself and my colleagues, we teach Scrum and coach Scrum, including Scrum at Scale in both German and English. I lived for over 25 years in Berlin, which is why I've got a picture of Berlin there. But I'm still very often in Berlin, but my home is now Scotland. So let's get on to the material. This is about just the general rules for implementing Scrum at Scale, the proposal for how to do it, and then also a few personal experiences in terms of, slight modifications of perhaps a standard approach, which can help to boost engagement. I think the first rule of scaling is don't do it, or rather, don't until you really need to and already have an excellent reference implementation. So one or at most a few teams. And I think probably the majority of you appreciate that the Scrum Guide is the basis for that reference implementation. However, the patterns that are currently published at scrumplop.org, it's all available free to download, and will or are already available in a book from Pragmatic Programmers, which is currently available as a beta book, and later this year, I guess, will become a full production release. Actually add to the standard definition of Scrum a really great set of patterns for what to do in certain circumstances, like in the real world, Scrum teams get interrupts. How can we, what are the rules of the game or recommendations for how to deal with them? And of course, in any sort of good reference implementation, you need a really good dose of common sense. So what's the standard approach really for implementing Scrum at Scale? I think one of the things that attracted me about Scrum at Scale, it does actually have quite a good story to tell in terms of how to go about implementing it. The first thing is to understand your context. Context is everything. It will determine what, some of the priorities about what to do. And then built into Scrum at Scale, there's the concept of a heat map assessment. So assess your current agile implementation, if you have one, using a heat map. Then you can rank the importance of the components, and that's going to be really very much determined by the context. And then if you combine that with a heat map, then you can derive your transformation backlog. And then, of course, the fun starts, implementing it. So let's just look at some of that. So understanding your context, there are various different factors that are important. How important is speed of delivery? How important is innovation, team empowerment? I mean, personally, I would say that's always important. Are the teams co-located? Are they highly distributed? How complex and or tightly integrated is the product? What's the time frame becoming agile? That will be determined, I guess, a lot by what is your competition doing. And how severe are the repercussions of a product defect? If, for example, your company is building software for a heart pacemaker, that would be very severe, I guess. So those are some of the questions you might want to take a look at, some of the factors that will will influence your context. And then we go on to making an assessment based on the components of Scrum at Scale. And horizontally, we've got so in rows, we've got the different components from Scrum at Scale. Vertically, we can either have individuals or teams. And we can use different colors and symbols to actually indicate what's the strength of that component. One of them is the executive action team. If everything's great with the executive action team, if the executive action team is removing impediments and helping to define the strategy or defining the strategy for implementing Agile, then probably we're going to have a green post-it with a circle in it. And other colors will indicate various levels of less than excellent. Then, once we've done that, once we've got either all of our teams or individuals, depending on the scale of the thing, to assess the current implementation, then we can combine the component strategic importance with the strength of the different components on a diagram like that. So plotting strength horizontally and importance vertically. And basically, you can come up with a prioritization. You're going to want to do the things that are on the top right first, basically. So we can see in this case, probably setting up the executive action team is one of the most important things to do first. Actually, that's probably almost always one of the most important things to do first. That's all very well. You know, that's quite a serial, linear deterministic approach to change. But actually change is really hard, especially when human beings are concerned. And if change is introduced, for example, introduction of Scrum at Scale, without participation through command and control, it generates resistance and fear, fight or flight. The fight or flight reflex dominates. And people are not open to new ideas, and they will have simple instead of complex thinking. And you know, D. Hock summarized, the founder of Visa summarized a little bit of this quite well, I think. It's you know, simple, clear purpose and principles give rise to complex, intelligent behavior. Complex rules and regulations give rise to simple and stupid behavior. And some of the approaches out there really make things very, very complex, and some of the scaling approaches. And Scrum at Scale, you know, as a meta framework, is not prescriptive, and I think it really fits in with this idea very, very well of keeping things simple, and giving people the freedom to do what's right, which they probably know in their heart what is right. I always say to my clients that if you think that Agile is about going from one standardized process to another standardized process, you don't really understand it. We need the teams ultimately to own the processes, own their own processes. One of the things I've been doing recently is working a lot with techniques that are around leadership, so senior leaders inviting staff to implement Agile rather than telling them to. So increasing engagement requires invitation instead of imposition. And you know, a couple of major influences there. Daniel Mezek's Open Space Agility is really inspirational. If you haven't taken a look at that, and Daniel is also a Scrum at Scale trainer, I really suggest you to take a look at that. So basically, we're talking about implementing a scaled Agile approach by engaging with the teams, starting off with a one-day open space meeting, and then having, for example, self-selecting teams based on generative rules about what does a great team look like, you know, minimizing coupling between teams, maximizing cohesion. So really the same sort of rules that lead to, that are part of great object-oriented software design. And setting up teams in the right way can really have a major impact on the complexity of the whole situation. So this is what I've been working on with some clients recently in Germany. And also very, very helpful and inspirational, I found David Marquet's Intent-Based Leadership. If you don't know his work, I really recommend to read his book, Turn the Ship Around. He's an ex-submarine commander. To cut a long story short, he ended up commanding a different submarine to the submarine he was trained for. And the story about what came next is extremely interesting. And his leadership approach, I think, really meshes with Scrum at Scale extremely well. Also helpful, I found over many, many years, are the ideas from Linda Rising and Mary Lynn Manns in their book, Fearless Change, and also More Fearless Change. These are great patterns for helping people to change. So I've really given you, just wanted to give you a very quick overview of some of the work that, of the standard approach for implementing Scrum at Scale. But also some of the nuances that you might want to put on it. For example, using an invitation-based approach rather than command and control. And in my experience, it really makes a difference to engagement. And after all, engagement is really one of the major problems right now in the workforce. We need to help people want to come to work, to really be totally engaged in their work. They spend a lot of time there, and it's really tragic that a lot of people might not actively hate their work, but they're not really excited about coming to work. So I'd like to open it up for questions, and over to you, Jessica.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing you mentioned in the previous slide about team sizes and trying to decouple teams just reminded me of something really interesting that Jeff had said recently in a class we co-taught. So we were teaching a class together in the Netherlands, and someone asked, what is the optimal number of teams for a scrum of scrums? And I thought to myself, well, the Scrum Guide, we always talk about 3 to 9 team members on a team. Probably don't want more than that in a scrum of scrums, because the goal is really to encapsulate the complexity. But what Jeff said really stuck with me. He said the optimal number of teams is as few as needed to achieve the goal. And so to the extent that, that just stuck with me, because to the extent that we can decouple teams and encapsulate that complexity, we're going to see dramatic improvements in productivity and effectiveness without having to coordinate if there's no real need.
Yeah, and that really fits in with the idea of minimum viable bureaucracy. What we shouldn't do is just keep adding teams to a scrum of scrums just because they're all in the same organization. If they don't have a need to coordinate, then because they're working on different things, then that will introduce unnecessary bureaucracy and increase decision-making latency.
Absolutely. So can you talk a little bit about maybe what were some of the biggest challenges that you have faced in some of your recent engagements, and how did you approach them?
So I think one of the challenges is, especially when using open space, is for a very traditional organization where they're just not used to deciding things on themselves. When in some of the organizations I work with, like financial sector organizations and telecommunications companies, you have people who've been working in a certain way for 15 years, 20 years or whatever, prior to the introduction of agile methods. And it can be really challenging if suddenly they're told, well, yeah, you've got to organize yourselves, and actually you guys can actually decide, can have influence about what teams you actually work in. So that's not trivial. And we've got to be very clear about the rules, what makes a great team. So I think that's why I talk about generative rules, making it really clear what is a great what are the characteristics of a high-performance self-organizing team, and make sure that people self-organize, but within those constraints.
Great. We have another question around so assuming the transformation backlog is a prioritized list of what comes out of the heat map, are we always using the same items? How would we define what the items needed to work for a Scrum at Scale transformation are?
Yeah, I mean, I think like with any backlog, the backlog items are going to start off as large items in most cases, and then we're going to break that down as part of product backlog refinement. And even the executive action team, which is really organizing that transformation backlog, will need to do product backlog refinement. Break that down into the parts which can be implemented in a short amount of time. When I'm thinking back to a major German telco where we used a very much Scrum at Scale approach, where we actually had a executive action team and agile practice combined in a rather large team. Probably if I was doing that again, I would look at separating that. But we had a backlog which was composed of things like setting up the equivalent of the EAT. We didn't call it an EAT back then, but it was effectively that. And we have other backlog items around helping business units or supporting business units, as they introduced agile. And those larger items then got broken down into smaller ones. So within a business unit story, if you like, you might have help the first team, help the second team, help the third team. So and iterating towards enterprise agility is the key thing. So, let's make sure though that it's always, as far as possible, at least something that's got a tangible benefit rather than just an activity, because then we're back in the old world of activity-based project management. Actually, one further thing I'll add there is that for that particular organization, we also made extensive use of John Kotter's work, the reasons why transitions and transformations fail. So those things, though you putting the backlog through the filter of the Kotter approach to transformation, while it's quite prescriptive, can be really useful in terms of generating ideas for what should be in the product backlog, in the transformation backlog.
Great. And a moment ago, you mentioned that maybe it would have been better to break that larger team up into smaller teams. So someone has asked the question of what are some of the practices that we might utilize when we need to break a bigger team into smaller teams? Is it the Scrum of Scrum? Is it implementing a Scrum of Scrums? And is there a risk of that reducing visibility?
So I think, in my experience, we keeping development teams at around 5, maybe 6. I mean, theoretically you can go up to 9, but usually it works out better with 4, 5, 6 people. That's really important. Otherwise, communication gets really, really complex between the team members. And of course, the danger is that you could end up with a sub-optimization, that every team goes off on its own way, even though they're actually working on the same product. So what I found to be really essential is that you've got a really clear, consolidated product backlog for that product, if you like. If you've got 5 teams working on a product, if you can break off, if you can actually define a real business case for each of the teams, they can still be quite autonomous in terms of how they pursue that business case. It could be things like maximizing the number of active users for their part of the system, for example. But make sure that you've got that overall consolidated backlog, and that you've got a chief product owner working together with the team product owners to optimize the overall picture, the big picture as well, so that we don't get any sub-optimization. I think that's the key thing there.
Excellent. So what about regression testing? How could that fit into a Scrum implementation within Scrum at Scale?
It's just like with Scrum, isn't it? It's regression testing is that the system has been regression tested is going to need to be part of the definition of done in most cases. And, I think Scrum at Scale doesn't change things. The commitment from every team needs to be that they actually commit to fully integrating their work with the work of all other teams at the latest by the end of every sprint. That's real hard, but it's important. But it's important, and it's possible in my experience, even scaled up to really large numbers of systems. So regression testing is part of that. And of course, we haven't got any sort of hope to do that unless we've got a fairly rigorous approach to test automation.
So automation is essential. What techniques might we explore for facilitating that level of coordination when it comes to having a shared definition of done or something like that among a Scrum of Scrums?
Yeah, I think the idea of we have autonomous teams, each with programmers, so front-end programmers, back-end programmers, testers, designers, and so on. And what we need to happen is that teams don't just stay in their box, not talking to anybody else, but they need to actually self-organize on a team overarching basis as well. And this is a type of quality circle, you could call it that, or a type of community of practice. So professional testers in each of the teams will actually work together on a team overarching basis to ensure the integrity of the system. This is what has become known as chapters through an experience report that was published several years ago about Spotify. So I mean, this is the basic idea of a chapter, but effectively it's a type of community of practice.
Great. I think we have time for one or two more questions. We've got one question around how does the Scrum at Scale model relate to change management methodologies like ADKR? I'm not familiar with ADKR. Are you familiar with that?
I've certainly read about it, and I think there's some very ADKR or ADKR has some interesting stuff in it. It's not directly aligned with it. That's the. I think it would be interesting to look at that in more detail and see how we might be able to integrate, whether it would be interesting to integrate that in our Scrum at Scale approach.
Could you answer more broadly how Scrum at Scale might relate to other change management methodologies in general? Or is that too big?
Yeah, I could. I mean, basically, I think it's very well aligned to OD, organizational development, which is fundamentally participatory. And basically the traditional change management approaches, which tend to be rather prescriptive, I don't want to go into any particular models, really for human-oriented change, and that's what we're actually talking about a lot of the time, leave quite a lot to be desired. That's why I think it's really important to bring an element of this invitation in as well. So you could use Scrum at Scale with your favorite change approach. Scrum at Scale doesn't mandate anything. It's just not prescriptive. My experience, however, if we take a human approach to change, a people-based approach to change, it's going to work out a lot better. And that would be true for any scaling framework, actually.
Great. And then for the last question here, Scrum at Scale adoption often means significant change to culture. So how do we incorporate that change in our assessment of an organization?
In our assessment, I mean, in the Scrum at Scale assessment, which generates the heat map, we don't have anything that's directly culture-based. But of course, there are many different descriptions or definitions of what culture is. The one that I find most compelling is from Johnson and Scholes, and describes it as a very complex thing that's a product of organizational structure, symbols, power structures, various other things. If you're interested in look up the cultural web from Johnson and Scholes, and certainly the large scale agile introductions I've been involved with, we've taken that cultural web very much on board and use that to generate ideas for the transformation backlog. So you can't explicitly change culture, but you can influence it. And organizational structure is one of the things you have to tackle there. Moving from a silo-based culture, functional silo-based culture to cross-functional teams is one of those crucial steps.
So would you say having the right structure in place to enable culture to emerge organically is the goal?
It's an important step, yeah. And culture is more complex than just organizational structure, but that's a very important topic. One thing I'll add there is, several years back, I was involved with I spent 3 years helping a large financial sector organization to introduce Agile. And one of the things that made a difference was having pinboards on wheels and flip charts in the elevators. We were always, as the crazy Agile people, we were always carting these things around. And after a while, people noticed that, and we even heard about, we heard in the canteen, we heard them speaking about Agile, even though they weren't actually doing it. So those sort of symbolic things can make a difference as well. So it's not just the organizational structure, although that's a really important topic.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay, so we have reached the end of our time box here. If you are interested in learning more about Scrum at Scale, the best way to do so is to take a certified Scrum at Scale practitioner course. They are available across the globe, and you can find more information about the course and find the nearest course to you on our website. Feel free to peruse the case study library as well. And if you go to scrumatscale.com/events, you can see the past webinars that we've had and any upcoming events. So feel free to check all of that out. Thank you so much, Simon, once again, for taking the time to share your insights. And thank you, participants, everyone who's on the call today, for joining us. Looking forward to seeing you all next time. Have a great day.
Bye.